listening to the Jersey Guys Podcast, the show that talks about hard rock, heavy metal, AOR, and West Coast music. In-depth conversation and special guests are always on tap, so settle in and turn it up. Now, here are your hosts, Tom and Mark.
Hey, Danny, thanks for joining us here on the podcast today.
My pleasure. Good to be here. Good to talk with some fellow Jersey boys.
That's right. That's right. I got to tell you, I drive down to Tom's to do our podcast recording every week, and I drive by Bourbon Street, from the song there, from the debut album, So I always sing it to myself,
Still there, still thriving?
It is, yeah.
Appears to be.
That song was supposed to be called Bourbon Street.
Right.
And John Kalodner just, for whatever reason, hates everything having to do with New Orleans. So he was just like, "You're not calling it that. You're calling it something else." I'm like, really? So it became "Lay Your Body Down" instead. Maybe it's a good call. I don't know.
Yeah, there you go.
It's kind of like an under the covers, pardon the pun, joke, because people, if you're from this area, you know what you're talking about.
Oh yeah, for sure. And I'm happy to say that there was a period after the album came out where we got to go in there and actually heard the song played, and
that's real good.
Yeah.
That was success for me.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I used to go to, going back with Tyketto, I saw you guys probably starting around, I'm a little late to the game, actually 1989. I know you were around a little bit before that, but I've seen so many shows around New York, New Jersey, from the Ritz to all over Jersey, Studio One, Birch Hill, and everywhere in between.
As far as Tyketto's concerned, you pretty much started from zero then.
Okay, yeah. I think I saw you guys it was December of '89. I want to say, did you guys open for Warrant at the Ritz? Was it possibly? Or was
I'm going to say Danger on that one.
Danger. Okay, that's what it was.
That may have been our album release show.
Okay. It was
played the Ritz twice, and I can't remember what the other circumstance was.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I think I saw you guys. No, actually, so I did see you guys at the Ritz with an album release show. Jersey band, American Angel, I think opened up for you, if I recall.
Yeah, that'd be right.
Yeah.
By the way,
I actually started.
Appreciate the shirt. I should mention.
And it's an original. If you go on eBay, they're loaded with bootlegs.
Yeah.
There's a guy in Bulgaria that's selling them on bootlegs. But he cheaped out. He didn't put the tour dates on the back. Right. So he just put the logo on the front. So you could differentiate what's a real one like this as opposed to the knockoffs. But I wanted to start with this album because that was my first introduction to you. I had tickets for the Iron Maiden show at the Garden in the Somewhere in Time tour. And I was at that show, and I was a big UFO fan. I was not a big Waysted fan because I did not really care for the previous incarnation of Waysted until I saw you singing. And that was my introduction that there's a new singer and the sound sounds totally better and different. How did you get hooked up with Pete Way and Chapman and those guys?
Whoa, how do I tell that in a short way? Yeah, it's funny. First of all, I do want to say that there seems to be a schism right down the middle of, and I don't know why people have to choose sides, but the people who like Tyketto, people like Waysted before me, people like Waysted after me. As it happens, the previous singer, Fin, is a good friend of mine. And I love both of it, What had happened was, though, that they were getting bigger. They were making noise. They were on Music for Nations, which was a great label in Europe. And they got to the point where Pete was faced with a decision about the potential of, going into like a Billboard top 200 band. MTV was still very new, taking advantage of all of that. And all the record execs, as they all do, they all gathered around with their opinions. And they were all like, this singer's too rough. It's too down and dirty rock and roll, which is so funny because I don't know what, 3 years later, we had Guns N' Roses, and then everybody wanted that,
Right.
So, but at that time, everybody wanted Steve Perry, that was, so they were like, we could see Waysted going, but we need him with another singer. So I had met Paul Chapman when he was living in Florida. He had heard about me and the cover band that I was in the tri-state area called Allied Forces. And basically the short of the story is that he found a way to get in touch with me, and I went down there and recorded a demo with his solo band. So the deal was that Paul was now going to go back to the UK and go right to EMI Records. He knew everybody there, and he's like, we're going to get a deal. It's like done. I'm the guitar player from UFO. This is going to happen. So we're all like, wow, it was all American kids, going, this is great. We're gonna be on an album. And instead of going to EMI and getting a record deal, he went to a bar and met Pete Way and joined Waysted instead. So we never heard from him after that. And it was then, I don't know, I guess a year later, he gets back in touch and says, listen, things aren't working out with Fin so well. He said, what would you think about coming over, rehearsing with us for like 3 days, and then going doing this festival in a stadium in Israel? I'm like, okay, sure, whatever. I was working for the phone company. I was like, yeah, I'll go. So, and half the set was UFO songs, which I knew anyway. So it was a blast all the way through. And it was kind of like, they literally said, if this show goes well, we'll probably get you in the band. And that's what it was. So the next morning, it was in Tel Aviv. It was in Ramat Gan Stadium, and it was a 3-day festival. Crazy bill. I mean, like no sense whatsoever. Marillion was the headliner because Kaylee was #1 all over Europe and the world. Climax Blues Band, Al Di Meola,
Wow.
Joan Jett was supposed to play, but she backed out. It was like, and it was a lot of jazz cats because there was a jazz festival in town. So it was all these different bands going on. We were the only hard rock band. And so the next morning after the party, a keyboard player walked in and threw the local newspaper on the bed. He said, I guess you're in. And this is my picture is the only picture for the whole festival. Like
really,
me in my embarrassing Freddie Mercury outfit doing, all that. And it was just, that was it.
That's great.
Band.
So how was the writing process on that album? Did they allow you, did you participate? Because the songs on that are just, to me, legendary. It's still one of my favorite albums of that era.
For the most part, unfortunately, if you read the credits, you don't see my name.
Right. That's why I asked, because I had a feeling you had a hand in it more than you were given credit for.
Yeah, it was my Spinal Tap moment when the album arrived. We were starting the European tour, opening up for Status Quo. We were in Norway, and it's like, the album's here. Box came out, and we're like, oh, this is great. And it took me about 10 minutes, and I started reading the back, like, all songs Chapman Way. I'm like, hang on. Yeah, what? You guys didn't write a fucking word. What are you talking about? The music's yours. But so I went to the manager, who was just honestly the nastiest piece of shit human being I've ever met. And he just looked at me and says, tell you what, go home. We'll cancel the tour. We don't care. He bluffed me, basically. Right. And that was it. And I just folded. Wow. I should have stood my ground, and I didn't. So yeah, I was paid to write with them, but I, of course, never got any songwriting royalties. So I'd say 3/4 of that album was written in Copenhagen with, I stayed with Pete and his girlfriend at the time. She was Danish. And it would start something like this. Pete would come in around noonish, and he'd have a bass, and he'd go, I got this thing, and he wants to go dun 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 dun, walls fall down, dun 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 dun. It's like, okay. It's like, right, do something with that, and he'd go out. And I'd spend all day at the apartment while he and his girlfriend would go out and get pissed all day, and I'd kind of structure something. Eventually, we took all those kind of half ideas and all that to Paul, who of course played them properly like a guitar player, and turned it more into stronger songs. One song on the album, So Long, was actually off of the Paul's solo demo that we did together, and he and I co-wrote that together. And it was always very painful because, let's face it, Pete Way's memory is not good, never was. His autobiography is absolutely filled with errors.
We just spoke about that with Neil Cott. If you watch the pod, it's hysterical because he said in the podcast that Neil used to run around as a cross-dresser. And Neil said, you know what, I'm gay. I'll admit to that. He goes, but I never cross-dressed.
I didn't even know he was gay. Neil was a school teacher at one point.
Yes.
Yeah, but there was all kinds of just, bad memory stuff or stuff he made up or whatever else. And so, he always just denied I had anything to do with it. And it just blew my mind. Even Paul wouldn't. Paul was like, yeah, he was there. He wrote it. He should be getting something. So it was, Pete and I only spoke a couple of times after that. And that was really that. It was such a shame.
Well, I kind of figured that was the case because Pete Way wasn't a big writer in UFO. So I kind of didn't think he wrote all those great songs on that Waysted album. I figured you had to have a hand in it.
Like I said, he was really good at he could generate the vibe.
Right.
Like Walls Fall Down. He'd sit there and chug on the bass and go, this is, you feel it? It's like dun 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 dun. And I was like, okay, all right, I get that. What was the other one? Which was the one we started writing about Bon Scott? Heroes Die Young.
Oh, that's a great song. Yeah.
He came in, he started talking about it. He said, so he gave me an idea. He said, he was with Bon Scott the night Bon died. They were like best friends. And so he said, I want to write something like that about him, kind of a rebel dying young and all that. So, I kind of created, it's more, it's more of a fantasy thing once the lyrics are all done. But yeah, he would kind of give me that first sort of start, and then I would flesh it out, and turn it into a song as best I could. I mean, I was pretty new at it at the time, and then Paul would come along and and add the real flash and good stuff to it.
And how was it being on the road with Iron Maiden? What kind of an experience was that for you as a young upstart musician?
It was ecstatic. You couldn't hope for a better band to be opening for. If there was any downside to opening for Iron Maiden, it was only that in some places their fans don't want to see anyone but Iron Maiden.
Madison Square Garden was one of them, because I distinctly remember.
It was tough. It was tough, and you kind of, obviously you pushed through. You saw through it all, but as far as working with the guys, as far as they couldn't be kind enough, they couldn't give you enough. Their attitude, unlike so many bands out there, specifically at the time, was always, if the opening band gets them pumped up, then we go over even better.
Right.
Yeah.
As opposed to opening for Status Quo, whose modus operandi was make them sound as shitty as possible so we look great. It was an awful tour working with those guys. Terrible.
Well, huge difference in two bands too. I mean, Iron Maiden were really, the epitome, and Status Quo. I mean, not a big personal favorite of mine.
No, mine either. And the funny thing is, though, in America, Status Quo was nothing, but
Zero.
in Europe,
yeah, I know they always had a big following in Europe.
Yeah, enormous. Arena selling band.
Yeah,
which is weird because most people in America are like, who? But on the other side, you go to England and talk about Grand Funk Railroad, and they're like, who?
That's exactly right.
Grand Funk Railroad is the reason we didn't have Status Quo, because we had those guys.
Absolutely,
and they were
100 times better. Those guys sold out Shea Stadium.
Yeah. No, that's one of my bands. Like
me too.
Top
Me too.
five.
Absolutely. I could talk about. I could have a whole podcast with you talking about Grand Funk alone.
It's funny. I did a podcast with a guy, and he did a little bit of a left turn. He says, sometimes we do just regular interviews, but if you want, he said, pick a band, give me 10 songs, and give me a little story about each one and what it means to you or why you're picking. And I went with Grand Funk Railroad. He's like, wow, nobody's gone with that. I was like, these guys are the reason Van Halen exists. You know, if you look at the videos that you can still find on YouTube of the Live at Japan stuff, that's what a rock band's supposed to be, man. All that.
He was the epitome of a front man, and he still
Absolutely.
this day doesn't get the just desserts that a Robert Plant gets and other guys get. He
Both
doesn't.
those guys. Brewer too. What a voice, you know, the two of them together, you know, and they were so ridiculously tight because they never stopped touring, you know, and so all their new songs were always being worked out and all that. They were rock solid. And I had this wonderful, I've actually got it right here on my computer. I got this wonderful payback for that. I did this whole podcast with this guy talking all about Grand Funk and pumping it up and pumping it up. And he calls me about 3 months later. He goes, you know, I kept thinking about that. And he said, I said, why not? I reached out to see if I could get in touch with Mark Farner, and he said yes, and he did the show.
Oh, that's great.
Wow.
You know, and he right in the middle of the show, he says, I'm talking to him, and I mentioned you. Oh, I mentioned that we did this whole show. And I've got it. Mark Farner goes, really? So who's this guy that was all about Grand Funk Railroad? Oh, it's Danny Vaughn from Tyketto. He goes, well, God bless. You know, I was like, yeah.
Scored points with Mark Farner. You can't get better than that.
And appeared in a video with him in the same year, because it was it was during the beginning of COVID. I did one of those composite things with everybody with
right.
Kip Winger, for Better Days Coming. And I had no idea who he had so many people on that thing. It was amazing. But for a minute, really a second, there's me and Mark Farner on the screen together. I was like, oh, this is just
nice.
What would you be your favorite Grand Funk studio album if you had to pick one?
Studio album. It's funny because my favorite isn't a studio album.
It's the Double Live?
Double Live, yeah. Without a doubt. It's just everything to love about that album. Man, I have so many over there, so that'd be a tough choice. All the Girls in the World Beware has got a kind of a sweet spot in my heart, because me and a buddy kind of discovered that album together, and we just listened to it relentlessly all the time.
Yeah, mine was Survival.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And and probably after that, I would say
Shining On is so good too.
Shining On is real. Phoenix, I always like Phoenix, and I know Phoenix was met like kind of with like mixed results at the time, but there was a lot of great keyboard work in Phoenix. That was like I liked them even better as a 4-piece when they brought in Craig Frost.
Brilliant, absolutely brilliant, and that's why I love the live stuff too.
Right.
He's providing all that good backup with, you know, it made the sound very, very lush.
Did you get to see them when they did the return in 95? Yeah, I saw them in the theater with my friend, and it was either 95 or 96. They were phenomenal.
Was that with Mark?
Yes.
Wow.
Yes.
Because I know other than that, they never play with him.
Yeah, that was that one tour. It was all 4 of them, and I think it was 96. It was
right.
I saw that. I want to say the Count Basie Theater, but I'm not 100%. It was in Jersey.
Right.
But all right, we'll leave the Grand Funk from there.
well, Danny, you were talking about these bands that were influences yours. Vocally, who would you say influences? But Mark Farner, or who else would you say?
There are so many, and they might not be obvious, as far as why they're an influence. It isn't always about trying to copy a style. I mean, I grew up listening to Stevie Wonder and Simon and Garfunkel, the Beatles, of course. One of the people that influenced me a great deal, as far as that's what I want to do for a living, like watching somebody saying, that was Ricky Medlock, was when I saw Blackfoot at the Capitol Theater.
Nice.
I saw them there too.
That show blew. I was side stage, man. Me and Jackson Spires were drinking. And
really?
Yeah. You don't win that contest.
No.
Holy shit. And he went on, I could barely stand, and he was playing the drums like a beast. And I was like, how is he doing that?
I think a lot of people don't realize how heavy Blackfoot was live.
Yeah.
they were enormous sounding, and they never took off the way they should. Like actually, Molly Hatchet surpassed them in popularity, but I thought Blackfoot was the best band of that era.
They really hit over in England.
Oddly enough, yeah.
Loved them. Yeah, it's funny. England really caught on to the whole Southern rock thing, with one exception, which I never understood. They love Skinner. You know, they love the Outlaws. They love mention the Allman Brothers, and they go, "Who?"
I know, and that's my all-time favorite band, as you could see.
They're the daddies, man.
Absolutely. You know, the original lineup of the Allman Brothers, I still think was the best band of all time. The original lineup, the original 6-man lineup.
Hang on a second. I'm gonna look for something. Hang on.
Yeah.
Where did I put that? I'm just wondering. Okay, so I got this bootleg, and it's Allman Brothers Acoustic Los Angeles, and it's June the 11th, 1992.
Mm-hmm.
This is so good. You know, just who knows how it was recorded, you know, but I just listened to it. I was like, listen to this band. They're just so unbelievably, it's that to quote Jimmy Page, it's that loosely tight thing that you don't
exactly see. Right. And that was with Warren Haynes and Dickie Betts was still there at that time, right? 92. Right. Yeah. I
saw Greg play solo. I'd say within a year he had died after that. So it was very soon. He had his heart, you know, he had the, you know, that whatever thing in his chest. So he'd had his heart attack.
Right. Because he had a liver transplant.
Yeah.
And then he had I think he had a pacemaker put in.
Yeah.
That's it. Yeah. He pretty much challenged death for a good 30 years in his life.
He did. Yeah.
You know, but man, he was good.
I absolutely loved. I've seen them so many times at the Beacon Theater. Oh yeah, definitely.
I can't sing that way, but that's, you know, it inspires me without a doubt.
Right.
Okay.
So going back to Waysted, was there any plans for another album, or that was strictly a one-off for you at that time?
It became evident at the end of the tour. That same manager I mentioned earlier, he just mismanaged the thing into the ground, and it became evident at the end of the tour that this was never going to survive. So, you know, we finished the tour. We had an amazing run with Iron Maiden, playing the US, playing Canada. We did some shows in Eastern Europe. We played all over Europe with Status Quo. You know, the album did crack the Billboard Top 200. Video was played, all that sort of thing. But there was all this infighting going on amongst the principals. Johnny D and I, we were just hired guns. We did our best to just hang on. And all of a sudden there was all this aggro behind the scenes about Chapman. And what I found out later was Chapman was really questioning the managers, like, okay, what happened to this money? And no, that doesn't sound right. Well, we need to talk about this. So the manager started whispering in Pete's ear, like, Chapman's not happy. He needs to go, blah, blah, blah. So we finished the tour in America. And I mean, this is how sneaky it was. One of the last shows we did was Irvine Meadows in Los Angeles. And after that, Johnny and I were told, listen, we'd like to stay in LA for like a week afterwards. Yeah, sure. Okay. But Paul left. Paul went home. We were like, God, why would Paul leave? Because they started auditioning guitar players as soon as his butt went out the door. We saw Michelangelo came in. I brought Red Beach to the table. This is pre-Winger. Gosh, there were some great ones. And we eventually got this really, really young guy who was named Eric Gammons, who was with Cold Sweat.
Oh, yeah.
And we did about 5 or 6, unfortunately for Eric, truly dismal club shows in that area. Like just that we did the Mason Jar in Phoenix and all that. And you know the old cliche about like 5 guys and a drunk Indian in the audience? We actually had that. I have, you know, it was crazy. And so at the end of that, like 5 or 6 shows, you just knew the lunatics were running the asylum, and we all kind of shook hands very quietly and said, yeah, we'll be getting back together in like 2 or 3 months and we'll do some more shows. And me and Johnny were like, no, we won't. Mm. That was it. Never heard from him again.
Well, I guess Pete Way wouldn't be the guy you'd really pick to lead a band. I mean, you know what happened with Fastway. It was kind of a similar type of thing with that band also, that he got involved and pulled out at the last minute. And it probably,
unfortunately, Pete suffered from being one of those guys that his opinion was the same as the opinion of whoever was kind of the strongest personality in the room.
Right.
He was, I mean, it comes with alcoholism and drug abuse. He was just, it was part of his everyday life. And, you had to ride that ebb and flow. Otherwise, you couldn't work with the guy.
Right. I guess that's why he lasted so long with Mog, who had a very strong, from what I've heard, very strong personality.
Yeah. Phil is a leader. There's no question about it. He knows how to do what he does. He knows how to keep the band going. I saw UFO just a couple of years ago, and they were outstanding. It was like, made me so happy because I've seen them over the decades.
Yeah, me too. I've seen them in all different incarnations and mediocrity, greatness. And it's ever since Vinnie Moore got into the band, it started to take an upswing.
Yeah. I mean, he plays the Schenker stuff. He really nods his head to Schenker because Vinny's a very different type of player, but he's very respectful of the Schenker and the Chapman material.
Right.
So because funnily enough, I mean, I don't pick up side. Once again, I don't mind. I don't get into that. Which was the better era, but a number of my favorite UFO albums are the Chapman albums.
I said that last. I told Neil Carter that. He was shocked.
Wild Dwelling in the Innocent. Wild Dwelling in the Innocent is my favorite. No Place to Run, right behind that. I mean, there's some great.
I like Mechanics a lot also. All 4 of those albums, post Schenker, I thought, in fact, I've always felt from cover to cover, I thought they were kind of stronger than some of the Schenker albums were. It's a sacrilege to say Schenker aficionados.
No, it's not that. You got to remember, too, that the Schenker era was the 70s.
Right.
And songwriting was a lot more kind of loose. It wasn't quite.
Right.
It was quite as compact and sometimes they would just go off on some odd tangents. Right. I actually discovered UFO. I had an aunt. God, I don't know how old I was, but I was really young, and I grew up in a household where the music was mostly kind of folk and lighter stuff like Dylan, Beatles, Simon Garfunkel, blah, blah, blah. But I started getting into rock and roll as a kid, and I had an aunt who just said, oh, he likes rock and roll. So she went to a record store and just like picked the most rock and roll looking album she could find. And one of them was an album called Flying.
Oh, that's a very early UFO. Yeah. And I like that period too.
Yeah, it was space rock.
Right.
Exactly.
Space rock. Yeah.
12-minute songs and things like that. And I fell in love. I was like, all right, whoever this band is, they're my favorite band. And, so I got to kind of ride that era. And then, of course, when you finally heard, the live album, it was like, okay, these guys are the best.
That early stuff was a trip, like stuff like Prince Kajuku, and they had these 20-minute jam songs, but it was good. And Mog's voice sounded exactly like what it became to know, was known for.
He's another one. I mean, he's definitely an influence because, I mean, no disrespect to them because I hold him in such high regard, but he doesn't have a big range.
No, he sings in the same register all the time. He just has a very cool sounding voice. Right.
Yeah, he's not an acrobatic singer. He doesn't have any like soul, right. You'll never hear him do that. But there's something so listenable to what he does.
And nobody sounds like him.
Yeah.
Nobody sounds like him.
He always manages to come up with some very cool lyrics.
Oh, the lyrics are great, especially the Chapman era, Diesel in the Dust and songs like that.
Yeah, Diesel in the Dust is brilliant.
What a great song. I mean, this story of he's a good storyteller inside his songs.
Yeah. What was cool? I can remember being on the bus, Waysted, and finding out that they're like UFO, their favorite bands to listen to when they were traveling were Bruce Springsteen and the Eagles.
Oh yeah,
Really?
I could hear that.
Yeah, that's part of, I think, where Mog, like, if you look at that storytelling, like Diesel in the Dust, that's a story Springsteen could have told, about a truck driver, who's bullying people and gets killed.
Yeah, the stories. There's another song on there, All Over You. It's like a really depressing song about a prostitute, the song All Over You, that's on that same album. And the way he phrases and rhymes and tells a story inside the song, and still has that great hook that he sings all the verses. It's genius. I always thought he's a genius songwriter.
Profession of Violence is
another great song. Oh, forget it. Yeah,
songs I've ever heard.
Right.
And yet has that dark edge to the lyric, and I think he sings that beautifully.
Yeah, no, he's one of a kind. There's only one Phil.
Yeah.
So the Tyketto got off the ground how? Could you take us from the beginnings of how that came about?
Well, after Waysted kind of ended kind of with a whimper, I just assumed, they'd be beating my door down. I was like, I toured all over. I knew a lot of people. And actually I had some opportunities, one of which was scuttled by Waysted's manager, which really pissed me off because I was supposed to be working with a band that was involved with Smallwood Taylor. Smallwood Taylor wanted to take me on. And, they had everything going on at the time. But then things just kept falling through. Nothing really happened. So I sort of decided it was time to sort of take the bull by the horns. If I was going to get back in there, I was going to have to do it with my own group. I had met our drummer, Mike Arbini, by pure chance. Now, you're going to forgive me. There's going to be a lot of name dropping here. I was still in Waysted. I was back from tour for a brief time. And I lived in Brooklyn, 5-6 blocks from Lemoore, actually. And one block away was another long-haired kid that eventually I was like, we kept seeing each other, like, in the, you going past each other, like, who's that guy? Is he only two guys in the neighborhood with long hair? And that guy was James Lomenzo, who is still one of my dearest friends today. And so he gave me a ring and he said, I heard you're back. I said, yeah. I said, listen, he says, I'm in the studio and I'm doing this. We're doing a drum demo for a guy who wants to send this in to audition for the new Whitesnake. We're doing this Cheap Trick song with a lot of extra drums on it. I was like, oh yeah, great. I love it. He goes, it's almost done. He goes, got to be honest with you, the singer's not really cutting it. Would you mind coming in and just knocking it out? I'm like, oh yeah, it'd be loads of fun. And I'm trying to remember who all was involved on it. So James was playing bass. Mike Arbini was the drummer. The guitar player was from Overkill, I'm pretty sure. It was all Brooklyn boys, And so I went in there and I sang it. Remember, out of all those guys, I'm the guy who just got off the world tour. White Lion hasn't happened yet.
Yeah.
Michael was still playing in cover bands. Overkill was kicking it off, but they were still local. So we finished that, and I'm coming out of there going, yeah, well, it's what I do, haha. And the drummer comes in, and he goes, that was great. That was so good. I think you could do it better, though. You said, what now? And we became best friends ever since because I loved it. And I was like, all right, this guy cares. I saved his number. That's what I'm rolling around to. So when I started going, okay, I really got to do this on my own and have my own band, he was the first guy I called. And he was into it right away, starting everything right from the ground up. And it took us a little while to find Jimmy and Brooke. We had a few other guys kind of messing around, but we did something that later became a thing, but I never heard anybody doing this, but we just basically started Tyketto Boot Camp. We found a place in Jersey. It's not Neptune. I can't remember where it was, but anyway, we were able to live and rehearse in this place. It was actually a business that had gone under, and the guy who owned it it was part of his bankruptcy agreement. He needed to have on-site security. So he just told us we could live there. No rent. We didn't know why. But you had this massive space where it used to be a showroom and everything else. We turned all the little offices into bedrooms. When we get up, we'd have coffee, have our breakfast, go down the stairs into the big room, and had all our gear set up, and we would just write and play like 5 hours a day. And that's, I think, why if you listen to that first Tyketto album, it's very cohesive. You know, those songs sound very similar to one another because it was all done, you know, a lot of hard work, but it was all done in a relatively short space of time.
And when you were writing these songs, was there a label that you were trying to pinpoint, or you were just going to shop it to whoever would sign it?
Yeah, we didn't have a label in mind. We did have management in mind, which was the guys who ran L'Amour,
Right.
Loud and Proud. They had, at that point, White Lion had hit, you know, I think was weight number 1. I think it was.
Yeah.
You know, so they had that. They had them. They had Tora, and they had Overkill, and they just signed Eric Gales.
Mm.
And we knew them because all of us had played L'Amour one time or another, you know. So, and that's another kind of weird circle that Michael was in a cover band called Dreamer, and I was in a cover band called Allied Forces, and we played all the same clubs and went around. But you know, Dreamer's guitar player was
Vito Bratta. Yeah.
Right.
So, so you know, it was an easy phone call to call the Loud and Proud guys and say, hey, listen, we got this thing going on. They were big fans of Mike and I, and they picked it up right away. So that really helped. And then they kind of aimed for the record companies at that point. And we did a couple of shows where we had, like, I'd say 6, 7 labels were all there. You know, it was that time. New York was hot. You know, Skid Row was happening. There were a lot of New York, New Jersey bands. Everybody was kind of coming out there to check things out.
Yeah, the Cat Club in all those places.
The Cat Club, that was the Cat Club in the city.
We were signed from the Cat Club. That was where Geffen signed.
Well, there was that Skid Row poster from way back in the day, and it was the guys, and then behind him had all the show bills, and it had the Skid Row. If it was a Cat Club show, and I think you guys were opening for him or something. Yeah,
that's right. Yeah, we opened for him twice, and I think that was their idea. You know, I mean, I knew Dave and I knew Rachel, but they really extended themselves to us several times, you know, to try and sort of get us a higher profile. So bless them for that.
Yeah, nice.
So that album took off big. I mean, it seemed like it did at the time. There was a lot of buzz about it.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, if I had a dime for every time somebody said, how come we weren't bigger? We came along a couple of years too late.
Exactly,
I mean, as far as the temperature of everything else that was going on. If that album had been released in 1989, I think, you know, we'd have made a much bigger mark. We are, without a doubt, you know, the ultimate underground band, because we get mentioned with so many of our peers, Skid Row, Winger, Danger, you know, all these guys. I'm like, those guys all had platinum records. We never had anything like that. We didn't come close to that, but we had the rep. You know, Tyketto was just always a good live band. You know, it was bang for your buck. People walked out of there going, wow, okay, that was something.
Yeah.
You know, we weren't forgettable. And that kept us going for years and years. It's what established our foothold in the UK. Geffen didn't want us going on tour in the UK. They wanted nothing to do with it. Europe's over. Just stay in America, you know, and all that. We're like, fuck that. We've been wanting to go to Europe all our lives.
It was a total opposite, right?
It was actually.
Yeah, and you know, we opened for White Lion, and it was a massive tour, and we've been able to come back ever since because of that start.
I think the songwriting from that album is what really has carried it 30 plus years after the fact. All those bands you mentioned, and I'm not asking you to comment it. It's my own personal opinion. I thought the Tyketto debut was better than those bands, just from the fact that the songwriting from beginning to end never let up. There was no weak songs. There were no cringeworthy songs. There were no songs as a fan you said, gee, I wished I left those couple off. So to me, I think it really has endeared for so many years just on the strength of the songs on it.
Thank you. And that was due to, like I said, that boot camp. I mean, yeah, there were some crappy songs, but we got, we're like, nope, get those out. We were able to have enough time. It's always like that with debut albums. You spend all your time on them. It's when you get to really sort of hone your craft, and there's no reason to duck it. I mean, we were all aiming for that Bon Jovi territory, and it was all like, the idea was to write, not Living Like a Prayer again, but to write songs like that, or like some of the stuff that was on Hysteria, that was all just massive arena rock, fists in the air kind of songs. That's what we were out to do. When we did the second album, we weren't thinking about that as strongly. We wanted to branch out with Strength in Numbers and kind of show some other sides and do some other things. But like I said, Don't Come Easy is very, very concentrated record, I think.
Yeah.
Now, the second album came out 3 or 4 years after that. Now, in my opinion, as a fan, I thought it was every bit as good as the first one, but it wasn't met with the success, I guess, because of the difference of 1990 to 1994. Is that fair to say?
Well, we finished that album. I mean, we went right back into the studio to record that album as soon as the tour was done. That album was finished Christmas 92, I want to say. Maybe before that. God, might have been Christmas 91.
So it took 2 years for it to actually come out.
3.
Well, it was out in Japan first, right? For a year, and then.
Well, here's what happened. And again, it's to Geffin's credit and their detriment at the same time. We had everything done. Now, most people listening won't remember what I'm talking about, but it had gone so far as that blank cassettes had been sent to radio stations for Strength in Numbers. So if anybody remembers how that was their little teasers. It was like, it just said, from Tyketto's forthcoming album, and there might be 2 songs on it and stuff like that. They went that far. The only thing that hadn't been done was the cover hadn't been decided yet, but the album was recorded, mixed, mastered, produced, everything was done. They paid a lot of money. We did it with Kevin Elson, who was, just one of the best producers you could ever work with. We did it in some great studios in LA and San Francisco. And we got the news. It was right after it was done. We got the news, like, Geffen's decided not to put it out. Really? They just invested almost $100,000 in this thing. And some guy in the accounting department went, nah, because everything was starting to change. If you had long hair, if you're good looking and dressed up and had long hair, people were kind of going, oh no, that's not us anymore. To their credit, I've never heard of this happening before. Geffen gave us the master recordings and said, if you can get someone else to release this, go with God.
I've never heard that.
Wow.
No.
That's...
And we were able to get to Music for Nations. Unfortunately, in America, the reason it wasn't any bigger is because we ended up going with a label called CMC that was just shit.
Yeah.
Very badly run by people who didn't know what they were doing, but talked a good game, and they disappeared within a year. But Music for Nations, tremendous label, great people. And our Strength in Numbers tour in Europe was twice as big as anything we did for Don't Come Easy. I mean, we toured for like 2 years behind that thing.
And the second album, I remember at the time, was hard to get because it only came out in Japan originally.
Now it's Japan, but then, like I said, America, CMC, but
that was like a year later.
It was after the fact, though, right? I mean, I could be wrong. You would know better than me, but I recall that Japan put it out first, and then after that,
if they put it out first, we were only talking about like a month.
Oh, okay.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Right.
Well, I remember seeing you guys. I guess around that time, you played a lot of Birch Hill shows, and
that was kind of our home away from home for a while.
Yeah.
So after this album is done, the touring that went with it was, I'm assuming, is less than what you would normally have anticipated if it was a few years before that.
Quite the opposite. Strength in Numbers, we toured our socks off. It was grueling.
Really?
We we did. Remember, I told you we had lived together. We, like I said, we did a couple of strange things. Going back to the first album, things had already started. They were starting to pull away from bands like us early. When we released Wings as a single, I mean, we absolutely believed in that song as a single. And at the time, 1991, you did not release a single without a video. And Geffen went, nah, don't want to spend any more money on a video. And we went, yeah. So we took everything we had left over from our publishing deal, which was 30 grand, and we paid for the Wings video. So it was all like that. And we did everything with strength in numbers. We toured it as hard as we could for, like I said, a couple of years. I looked at some of our old tour t-shirts. I'm looking at these 5, 6 in a row. I'm like, what the hell was I thinking?
Yeah. You know? Was that in America or was that in Europe?
Germany and
okay.
Yeah, that's why I don't recollect it, because I don't remember you guys being around. But I didn't realize how much you toured in Europe.
America turned its back on us in a big way, and we were like, all right, well, we got to go where they want to hear us play.
Yeah, because I only remember, like I said, Birch Hill, and like it was a place, Rock the House in Wallington, New Jersey. I saw you guys at.
Yeah.
So
yeah, and that was just because obviously it was a local gig, so we didn't go too far. But yeah, we weren't touring anywhere else in the States.
Okay.
We worked it the album came out in '94, and I left the band, I guess, the end of '95.
Well, I wanted to ask you that. What was that? And I was talking with Tom earlier, and we were saying, I don't know if we ever heard the story, but what led to you leaving the band?
There were a lot of things going on. Watching the band that you've built up, like I said, particularly in America, you go and 30 people come to a gig. It was heartbreaking. It wasn't like that in Europe, but it was really hard. I mean, it was, we were touring by the skin of our teeth. We were paying for everything. So, there was no frills. Yeah, we had a tour bus, but it didn't have air conditioning, that would cost extra. And it just, between that, I got so sick of the music business that I was just like, I just don't want to do this anymore. It really just came down to that. And I didn't do anything with music for 4 years.
Okay.
So basically wore you out.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's part of, it might be a little bit of that kind of selfish dreamer in me, but I just, I couldn't watch it die. And I just thought if you worked hard enough, you deserved better, and we weren't getting it.
Yeah.
So I just said enough.
Well, the band carried on, obviously. I mean, I actually saw the band in, I guess it was 96 with Steve Augeri when the Shine album came out again at Birch Hill. And you said you were just kind of out of music at that point, right?
Yeah, absolutely. No, actually, Steve was my idea.
Oh, really?
He was a good friend, and he was working in Staten Island at a club called the Red Spot. We used to hang out there and drink all the time. And Tall Stories, to me, that's one of the best albums of that whole era.
Yeah.
That first Tall Stories album is just tremendous. Like you were saying, the songwriting is just so way up there.
There were two albums that came out at that time from New York bands that never got the credit they deserve. Tall Stories and another band called Diving for Pearls. I don't know if you're familiar with that album.
I know who they are, but I don't know the record.
Oh boy, yeah.
I have to ask my wife about that. I bet she has it. She's into that, so she might have it.
The first Diving for Pearls. You have to hear that. It's tremendous.
That's a good recommendation. I'll check that out.
Yeah, super classy album.
Yeah. I just told the guys, I said, man, Steve isn't in, Tall Stories has ended. I said, Steve's just working at a bar. Get him, because that guy can sing, and, off it went. He and Brooke hit it off like a house on fire.
Mm.
So now you got back into a point in your career where you started to do your own solo material.
Right.
If you could tell us a little bit about that.
Well, during that period of I was working, driving forklifts and working in factories and things like that. I never stopped writing music. And the beauty of that was I no longer had a specific reason to write it or a specific audience to write it for. I just started writing whatever came into my mind. And I'm like a sponge. I like all kinds of stuff. I like folk music from around the world and all, kinds of weird shit. And so I just wrote. And at some point or another, Mike Arbini and I started talking again, because when I left, he wasn't very happy with me. So we just kind of parted ways. And it was one of those, so what are you doing? Working here, doing this, doing that. So, but, I have actually been writing songs, and I made these little home demos. And he came by and he's like, let me hear what you're doing. And to be honest, Mike has always been probably my biggest supporter, somewhere between him and my mom. And he listened to a bunch of songs. And he was like, this is an album, dude. He said, you should be doing this. So really, he pushed. I'm like, I don't want to get back into this shit. And it was just, we went with, a small label, because again, that's who was interested. And so we did the first record with Soldiers and Sailors on Riverside, and I just love that album because there's no set force to it. It's just, I think it has a very, very 70s vibe to it as far as the types of songs. Songs are allowed to breathe, do what they want. It was recorded kind of raw. It's not very polished sounding. And I love the way that one came out.
And similar to Flesh and Blood that you had done with Mark Mangold, had that 70s. I thought
Al
had that
Pitrelli.
70s, and Al Pitrelli had that 70s type.
I did that right after I left Tyketto. I had a couple of possibilities come up that I might have stayed in the music business, and then I just kind of backed out. But long story how I got hooked up with Mark Mangold, but he just sent me some stuff, and he said they had another singer and the record company just didn't like his voice. Here we go again. And he said, would you be interested in just coming in and doing these songs? Even though, you didn't write anything. I was like, and I just loved it because it's dirty rock and blues.
Right.
Some of it goes into that Bad Company territory.
Right.
And Paul Rodgers, certainly in my top 3 vocalists ever. And I was like, yeah, okay, let's do that. And it was fun because I wasn't in charge of anything. I didn't have to think. It was just, here's the song, learn it, get in there with, me and Mark working it out. We did 13 songs in 4 days, something like that. And it's still, I love listening to that record for that reason. It has nothing to do that I'm on it. I just think, he and Al and some of the other guys, they wrote some great material. And, we just recently got to re-release it on a French label with 2 bonus tracks and one new one that Mark and I did together. It was a lot of fun.
He's an interesting guy, Mangold. We had him on the podcast early last year, and he's been involved with a lot of big things behind the scenes, even things you didn't know he was involved with. And he's one of the purveyors of that pump rock sound, that came out of the U.S. in that 79, 80 period.
Didn't he write or co-write If I Could Turn Back Time for Cher?
Yes, he did.
Yeah, he did some Michael Bolton stuff too.
Yeah.
He did some Michael Bolton stuff.
Yes.
So yeah. What was the other one?
Because he told us stuff that we didn't even know.
He did one that Def Leppard ended up doing, I think.
Oh, really?
It was originally on Paul Rodgers' album, The Law.
Oh, I have that album.
Oh, yeah.
That's a great album.
Yeah,
it is.
That's a great album that went absolutely nowhere. It was also, it just.
I got to look it up now. See what happens.
That's right. I think there was a song.
I know exactly where it is. Let's see. For a Little Ride.
Oh, For a Little Ride, yeah.
Yeah, sorry, that wasn't Def Leppard. He didn't do.
Didn't Benny Mardones do that?
That's right, him and Benny Mardones. I'm looking right at.
Okay.
Okay, so no, I did make a mistake. The Def Leppard song was actually written by Phil Collin, and it's on the Law album. It's called "Miss You in a Heartbeat."
Okay, so you had it the other way around. Yeah, you were close.
Yeah. Yep.
You're in the ballpark.
So yeah, I mean, like I say, Mark's been involved in a lot of stuff.
I want to jump ahead actually, and we'll come back to more Tyketto stuff, but I want to jump ahead to 2020. You did the Snake Oil and Harmony album with Dan Reed. I actually, that's one of my favorites. I was telling Tom the other day. I mean, every time I listen to that album, and I listen to it quite often, I just love it. I love all the songs on it. Is that something? Well, first of all, how did that come about? And is it something that might continue?
Well, Dan and I met at Download one year. I think it was 2014. Dan Reed Network and Tyketto were on the same stage. And of course, I'd heard his name for years and years, and in many, if Tyketto was frustrated, the Dan Reed Network was really frustrated because they were this close. I mean, they were opening up for the Stones, you know, I mean, it was happening. So we had a lot in common, and we just got to chatting, and I've been doing a lot, getting my confidence up as far as being a solo acoustic player. And I've been doing more acoustic shows, but I really wanted to I prefer to work with others rather than just me. I like the give and take. I like the unpredictable, it's a little unpredictable. I like that. So I approached a number of my singer friends and just said, wouldn't it be great to do an acoustic tour, like two of us together, a little storytelling, a little, this wasn't kind of a common thing yet, but it was being done by Lyle Lovett and John Hyatt, who are two of my favorite songwriters on planet Earth. And I thought, this would be cool to do with rock guys, and everybody I talk to, you get the same, Eric Martin, Kip Winger, Jeff Scott Soto. Dude, I love that idea. Have your people call my people. And it falls apart. You just never hear anything. I mentioned it to Dan at Download, and I said, I think it would be a cool idea, and it seems like you and I would sing well together. And he just gets out his diary and goes, I'm free next April. Okay. So we toured, and we did 2 tours. And it was great because there was no ego involved, as it was never the same set twice. Dan was brilliant for, people would shout out something and he'd just play it. I can't do that. I need sheets. I gotta look at words and music. But we did enough stuff where he made it very clear early on. He's like, anything you want to jump in on, make shit up. Give me some harmonies on something. It doesn't matter if it's what's on the album. Have fun. And so same courtesy went back to him. And we really had a thing going that was kind of special. And so people started saying, well, are you going to do your own songs? Why don't you write something? So we did a test run. We wrote a song together called Where the Water Goes. And we started playing that live. And the reaction was pretty strong. So we're like, all right, I guess we're going to do an album. So it kind of came at a difficult time for me. Dan really took the helm on that album. We recorded it in Prague, which is where he lives, and that's no hardship. Go and be there for a while. But of course, it came out. All right, so I was in London, March of 2020. I'd done 3 days of press, both for that album and for my solo album, Myths, Legends, and Lies, which had come out just a little before that. And I hadn't done a press junket since the 90s, where it was like all day long, you're at a hotel and press is coming in and you're talking, and then you move on to the next guy. And on the 4th day of that was supposed to be the first day of our show to support that record, which was in London. And the phone rings at like 7 a.m, and it's Dan. And he says, listen, he goes, I'm sorry to tell you this. He goes, but I think you need to get home. And he said, they're shutting down flights in and out of England. And so that was it. We never got to tour. I got a flight out that night, and 2 days later, flights between England and Spain were suspended. So if I hadn't done that, I wouldn't have gotten home.
Yeah. I mean, the worst thing about that album was the timing, and when it got released, because 2020.
Story of my life.
Yeah. Well, do you think there'll ever be another Snake Oil and Harmony album?
I don't know. And if it is, I don't know if it'll be Dan and I. It might be 2 other people. Dan is so neck deep now in other non-musical projects. Yeah. He's got an independent film he's doing. He's as happened with all of us during COVID, particularly during the lockdown period, we all started looking around for something else to do. And Dan started painting again, and it's really taken off for him. he's got his own big painting studio now and ships all over the world, and it's amazing stuff.
Wow. Well, now I saw you in 2016. You, I guess, I mean, maybe, I don't know why you were here, but you came back home to New Jersey. You played an acoustic show, a solo one at Mexicali in
Oh, you were at
New Jersey.
Mexicali.
I
Oh
was
my
there.
God.
Yep.
I love that place.
Yeah. And you think you would you ever come back and come to America again and come back to back home and play?
You know what? The whole house concert thing has sort of become a staple. I really started to push that, and I was shocked last year at how many offers I got for the States. I never really considered it because, of course, it's $1,500 to fly there and back, but notch up enough shows. So last year I did a bunch in the Northeast, some house concerts. So I'm going to do the same thing the end of this year, September, October. So I've got like 4 or 5 house concerts already booked, like Maine and Philly and Baltimore. So I'm definitely going to land a few Jersey shows that won't be private shows. That'll be public shows. So that's definitely going to happen. I would say first 2 weeks of October.
Nice.
We got to see Tyketto, the two of us, in a place called American Beauty in the city in Manhattan.
Yeah.
Kind of the big homecoming back in, was it 2017?
That was a great show. Tremendous show.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it was a little rough. The club was a bit difficult for sound, but it was just great to have the people that we had, because it was mostly all people that have been with us from the start.
Yeah.
That's what made that show. I thought the crowd was like, it reminded me of like a 1988 type of show.
Yeah.
Everybody was singing the lyrics to all the songs, and you guys were on fire. That was a great lineup that you had at the time too. Greg Smith, I think, was the bass player.
Yes, that's right.
Right.
Yeah, Greg's awesome. Well, we're doing that lineup is playing its final shows on the Monsters of Rock cruise.
Yeah, Mark was telling me before we went.
I was going to ask you about that. I mean, obviously, a few months back, there was the announcement. Michael is now kind of getting out of music, and Chris, I guess same thing. Kind of dedicating himself back to his family. I guess. So you guys brought 2 new guys into the band. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, I mean, the best thing about that whole thing, I mean, I can't even tell you emotionally how I'm going to feel on those last 2 shows. It's too abstract for me right now. But the best thing about all of it is there was absolutely no drama connected to it at all. The 2 guys, we talked about it, and I said, listen, whenever this shit's over and we get back out, I said, one of the things that's always difficult for Tyketto is because of their both Chris and Michael, their job commitments, their life commitments, we're really only able to do about 2 weeks worth of touring out of a year, and maybe just the occasional festival here and there.
Yeah.
We really need to open that up. I mean, Reach suffered for that. Reach is my favorite Tyketto album. I think it's unbelievably strong.
Oh,
and I think it would have gone a lot further if we had been able to tour, 4 weeks, maybe 5, if we're lucky. And the guys went and thought about it, and they both came back and said, you're right, Tyketto needs this, but I can't do it. So I said, and I was perfectly okay with saying, okay, then I'm going to pack it in, and that's fine. That decision is okay too. And both Michael and Chris are like, why? Why would you pack it in? I said, without you guys, I could never think of playing in Tyketto without Michael. It makes no sense.
Yeah. And
they really pushed and said, look, if you're singing them and they're the songs people want to hear, you should still be out there. So we'll see. We'll see how the audience feels about it, It's nice, though, because my life has these lovely circles to it. And so, Johnny D's coming in on drums.
Yeah, from the Waysted days.
He hasn't played drums with me standing in front of him in 30-something years.
Yeah.
And Harry Scott Elliott is someone that we know through, working with Caned, and, we got to know him, and he and Chris really hit it off. So it's nice because Chris has been helping Harry get a handle on, how we do things, the various pedal switches, all that stuff that I don't know anything about. And Johnny, who, spends most of his time playing some hardcore metal with Tora, he's been able to just sit and chat with Michael about, how he does things and all that. So there's this great kind of familial atmosphere going on around this. So we're doing the 2 shows at the Monsters of Rock cruise. I'm heading back to England for 2 days off and then straight into rehearsals with the new guys.
Oh, wow. And you guys got a big tour with FM and Dare, right? All around Europe there?
Yeah, we're doing 12 shows in the UK. And then Tyketto's going on to do, we're playing France, Belgium, Germany, and Holland after that on our own.
Wow, nice.
I just wanted to ask you a little bit about a few questions about Reach, which is an album that I loved. And I thought it seemed like your songwriting really got rejuvenated. In fact, it has my favorite Tyketto song, Circle the Wagons, on that.
Oh, brilliant.
Where did those songs come? Because these songs were, some of them I thought were on the caliber of the debut album. That's how strong they were.
Thank you. I agree with you. I feel the same way. We had enough time. It was a weird way to do it, of course, because like everybody else, we're all writing from different countries, in our home studios. But I wasn't sure if that was going to work. I much prefer, woodshedding in a group together, but it just wasn't possible with everybody living in all different places. So I wasn't sure if it was going to work. But the first song that I wrote that I thought, I think Tyketto could do this, it feels strong, was a song called The Run. And to me, that was, when I start something, it's always very acoustic based. And it's understood that, don't play like I play, pick up the electric guitar. That's how it always was with Brooke. I would play something nice and jangly on acoustic, and then I'd say, take it, make it rock, do your thing. And so that was this kind of gauntlet with Chris. I sent him The Run, and Michael threw some drums on it from home. And the demo that Chris sent me back was so perfect. Like everything I could have imagined, like how that song was supposed to be. So I was just like, okay, this has got to happen now. And so we really put nose to the grindstone. And some of the songs like that started with me, Circle the Wagons did. But then other songs started with Chris and Michael working on some cool rhythm structures and chord structures together and sending stuff to me, like Tearing Down the Sky was one where, they had the music kind of worked out and I had to figure out lyrics to put on top of it. And that's the first time we'd ever really done anything like that in Tyketto.
I thought the songwriting was great, and I'm hoping there will be another album at some point under the Tyketto moniker.
Yeah, if this tour goes well and we all start to gel again as a band, then that's the next step, is to start writing some stuff or start working with different writers.
I mean, I honestly, like me personally, like what you said a minute ago, how Chris was working with Harry, right, to kind of get the guitar sounds down, and I always thought that Chris got that maybe. I don't know, was there anything like when Brooke kind of left? Was there, because I thought Chris had Brooke's tone and everything for the songs, like right there. Exactly. Yeah. So it's encouraging to hear that.
There was no connection between Brooke and Chris. I mean, Brooke had, very much his own life to lead at that time. He was living in Las Vegas and was doing a whole bunch of stuff. But Chris, well, first of all, was very much in awe of Brooke. That they're two, in many ways, different style guitar players. Mm-hmm. And I think Chris is potentially the best all-round guitarist I've ever met. And I've met some really good ones. But he seems to be able to, he has that gift of being able to do what is needed rather than what makes him look good. What works for the song, what works for, because he was in a band called Furion that was quite a bit heavier than what we were doing. So for him to step back from that and, start looking at some of the stuff we did, Letting Go is one of my favorite Tyketto songs. And he wrote all the music to that and just sent it to me. And it just, I had the lyrics and the melody after 2 listens. I'm like, I know exactly where this song's going. Chris is a very hard worker, and that's why. And he's very much OCD. So if he's like going to learn Brooke's stuff, He knows every note, every nuance, every slide,
Okay. Yeah. No, because I mean, I saw you guys at M3 in Columbia, Maryland, of course, the M3 festival.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, I was blown away. I mean, just to hear him, the solos, everything was like spot on.
Yeah, I think after one of the first shows we did with him, some stuff went on YouTube, and I got an email from Brooke going, "Yeah, the kids got it."
Yeah, he definitely does.
Yeah. Well, he did the Pride album too, wasn't he on Pride?
Yeah, well, that's where I first met him. Was Pride.
I love that album.
Yeah, and that's another album that just flew under the radar. It didn't really in the States. It didn't get any notice at all.
Yeah, well, Matt, the singer on that album, is really good.
Yeah. That's the singer on that is real good.
Yeah.
I have a couple of oddball questions for you. The song "Walk Away," why was it left off the debut?
Well, we had, I think, 2 extra songs at that time. We didn't have any more than that. So I can't remember. Was "Walk Away"? Are you looking at was that a Japanese single?
I have this CD single that back in the day was very much in demand because it was really hard to get a hold of.
Well, you always had to have one extra song for Japan.
Right. And back then,
we still do.
But now, you know what everybody does now? They do either an acoustic version or an edited version. But back then, 30 years ago, you had to give them
thousands of dollars at studio time just so frickin' Japan could have their own song.
Right. But that's what everybody did. But back 30 years ago, you had to give them a studio track. Yeah.
Yeah. The reason for that is because, crazy as it sounds, Japan wants to release it on their own label.
Right.
It's more expensive for a Japanese fan to buy a Japanese product.
That's right.
Than it is for him to get an import from Britain or America. So the only enticement they have is if you put an extra track on it.
Right.
So there was "Walk Away" and a song called "Wait Forever," and one of those 2 was on the Japanese version, as I recall. But yeah, "Don't Come Easy," we wanted to keep it to 10 songs. It was the right length. It was very much, slam bang all the way through. And as Tyketto was always very much a democracy, and those 2 songs never got quite the higher rating in our camp that the songs that made the album did.
And my other question, you were in a project called Burning Kingdom, which a lot of people don't seem to know about. What was that all about? It was a little bit, the style was a little bit out of the lane of what you normally do. What was that all about?
Well, I've lived in Spain now for 13 years. And as you do, you start to know the musical community of where you live. And there's a lot of great musicians and a lot of rock and roll in Spain. I live in the very far south. Not so much rock and roll here, but Madrid, Barcelona.
Oh yeah.
Wow, all up that way. Big rock stuff. A lot of heavy stuff too. Burning Kingdom I got a phone call from a guy a dear friend who's unfortunately no longer with us, who he booked Tyketto several times for shows up in the north. And he said, "Listen, I have this great guitar player. His name is Manuel Seoane. Basically, it's a solo album. It's his band. It's the second one they've done. They had a singer in place who I won't mention. And they were paying him to sing and do the songs in English. And he took their money and he went on vacation. They never heard from him. And he said, this album is supposed to be finished and there's a release date penned, and said there's no lyrics. Would you consider going up there and meeting with Manuel and maybe trying to finish this album for him? And I never tried anything like that. The music was recorded, finished, so I didn't have a lot of wiggle room to say, oh, it'd be so much nicer if this went to A minor here, too late, it's all done. But Manuel is such a sweetheart, and he is an incredibly talented player and one of the nicest people I've met. So I just said, it's not what I would want to do, but all right, let's do it. So, some of the songs on there, I'm not happy with the production on it. That's the worst of it for me. But there are a few songs off there that came out really well. And again, he's a stellar player. And we did a couple of gigs. It was fun. I'd like to have done more.
So this was basically your stab at being a hired gun.
Yeah, I've done it a few times. You know, where not for whole albums, but you know, for your guest appearances and stuff. But yeah, exactly. That's exactly what I was.
Because there's like about half a dozen guys, I won't mention their names, you probably know who they are, that make a career out of doing this. They're on 20 different, they don't have an allegiance to any of these bands, but they'll sing on a whole record. They'll do some tour dates, but they're basically hired guns.
Yeah, or you know, you get involved in projects. I can see one right by your elbow there, From the Insides. You know?
Exactly.
Good eye.
That's where, you know, Frontiers puts a bunch of different guys together from different things, and it's a great idea. Except now they've done it 1,000 fucking times, and people.
Well, that's it. They've gilded the lily too much with it, and even guys like me have gotten bored with it.
Yeah,
because
and, you can only have so many ex-member of albums. It's like, come on, you know, they're not selling the music anymore. You know,
the names.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, but so yeah, I've done a fair bit of stuff, hired gun stuff. Just very rarely for an entire album.
There was I can't think of the album, but there was something that Richie Zito was part of that you were on.
Yeah, that was his solo album. He just had a bunch of songs that had been laying around, and he knew an awful lot of good people to work with.
Right.
So yeah, I got to do 2 songs with him for that.
Right.
Avalon.
Yeah, that was actually a really good album. That had some real good songs on it.
Yeah, Richie Kotzen's on that.
Right, Kotzen is on it. You're on it. Yeah, that was actually a high. That was when it was still good, that type of stuff. But over the last decade or so, it's gotten so played out and watered down that concept of, you know, throwing out.
People are making a lot of these albums in their home studios now.
That too.
They sound okay.
Yeah.
But it doesn't have,
they're passable.
Yeah. I mean, that's one of the, again, for better or for worse, that's one of the things about Tyketto too, is that we don't want to, you know, we take our audience's support and faith very seriously. So, you know, budgets aren't what they used to be. You know, I can't remember. I think Don't Come Easy cost like 150, 175 grand to make. We didn't have that kind of budget for Reach, but every penny of it went into making the record, not into paying everybody's rent and, you know, whatever else. So we have an incredibly strong sounding record because we were able to do it at Rockfield Studios, just like in the good old days.
Right.
Proper live-in, true blue recording studio, you know, one of the best in the world.
Right.
No, that's a big thing to be able to get everybody in the studio like that nowadays. Because you said it doesn't happen, you know, everybody's out on their own and recording their parts and emailing each other and everything.
Yeah, exactly. And you can tell, I mean, I don't put it down because that's how we have to work, but you can feel it, these kind of cut and splice records. And I've done quite a few of them.
Yeah.
Anything else you got?
I think I've run out of questions for you.
Well, Danny, I mean, Tom and I really appreciate it. It was great, you know, great stories, great catching up with you. We wish you the best of luck with the final shows with Michael and Chris, you know, coming up at the end of the month and beginning of next month. And then, actually April into May, right? And then best of luck on the tour with FM and Dare. And you know, I really hope, you know, we get to see either if it's just you or, you know, if the band ever can make it to America again, that would be awesome.
Yeah, I would like to get the band back to the States somehow, you know, but the only way I can see it happening is if we get a slot on a couple of festivals and a few gigs around it, you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, hopefully I'll get to run into you guys, like I said, sometime in October. I mean, it's, you know, I haven't booked the flights yet, but it's pretty much going to happen. And I'm talking to some agents over there, the same people they're booking, like Mr. Big, booking Eric Martin and, you know, Anthony from Tora and Tony Harnell and all that. So I'll get something up in that area.
Okay. I see a Mexicali or a Debonair music hall coming up. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. Yeah. Well, Mike can handle Jersey. That's for sure. So we'll get something in Jersey.
Okay, cool.
And before I let you go, I have one more question for you. Since you know Dan Reed, How did Dan Reed not, especially in that Slam album, it had everything at that time that I thought was going to blow that band huge.
Mm.
How did they hit and miss?
It's a painful story, but he tells it. He's right in the middle of I think it was the tour with the Stones. If it wasn't, it was somebody else like Bon Jovi.
They opened for Bon Jovi, yeah.
So maybe it's a Bon Jovi tour.
Yeah.
He got so sick of everybody talking about how cute he was and the hair and the lips, and nobody wanted to talk about music. And so he's in the middle of a tour, a massive tour. He goes back to his hotel room,
shaves his head.
And this is his story. So he said, I didn't realize how impactful such a thing could be.
Oh, absolutely.
So a few nights later, we're playing the same tour. Robert Plant comes backstage and he says hello, shakes my hand. He looks at my head and goes, oh, I've heard about that. And he said, that's when I knew we were in trouble.
Wow.
He just didn't think.
He actually sandbagged his whole career.
Completely.
Wow.
Completely.
Because when that album came out, it had everything. It had that funk element, which became very big. It had the band that had Afro Americans in it. It had Americans. It had, I think, a Chinese Oriental player in it too. And that was starting to break also, because you had Living Colour, you had Tony McAlpine, Greg Howe. That element, it had everything. It had the great looking front man. It had the great songs, and it seemed to be a band that at that point couldn't miss. And then they just went away.
What else they had that was kind of key? This is digressing for a minute, but you remember Jewel?
Sure.
Yeah. The first time most of us ever heard of Jewel was because Tom Cruise started telling everybody how much he loved this artist, Jewel. And then next thing you knew, Dan Reed had the same thing. There were people completely outside of music that were like famous, that were like, Dan Reed, I love this band. Guys like Rod Laver, tennis star.
The tennis guy.
Yeah, he was like a massive fan. Once that starts happening, dude, that's just a major fire waiting to happen. All you gotta do is blow on it a little,
Right. Right.
So that's where they were. They were right there. And Dan's got amazing stories to tell from all of that. Good, both good.
I'm glad I asked you that, because it dawned. I wanted it when you were talking about them earlier. I wanted to ask you about that, and it dawned on me at the end, because that was one band I thought had everything for that time right there, and it just it didn't happen. But now I know why.
It comes down to one haircut.
Yeah,
there you go.
Yeah, well,
terrifying, isn't it?
Well, I guess
that's
would be about it.
I'm out of questions. Officially.
Yeah, appreciate it. Best of luck on everything coming up, like I said, and like I said, hopefully we get to see you guys, or see you at least in person at the end of the year.
Yeah, that'd be great. I mean, if it happens, please, make sure to come over.
If it happens, we'll find you.
Definitely.
Good. Yeah, it'd be great to meet you in person again.
Great. Excellent.
Thanks very much. I appreciate it very much.
Thanks, Danny.
I'm all up. Anybody's into the Allman Brothers, all right in my book.
And Grand Funk.
There you go. All right.
All right, guys.
Take care.
Much.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye, then.
Have a good one.
You too.